Okay, and we're recording. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm Ruthie Braffman Shulman. I'm the Director of Education and Engagement at United Orthodox Synagogues here in Houston. I'm also, oh, one second, someone's asking me for a passcode. This is why I have to keep my phone near me. UOS. Okay, passcode's UOS. It's not really a secret. I'm also in the UOS at Halacha program. So it's been a busy year in the pandemic as well. That's okay. I got this idea to do a conversation. Well, that's not true. I'll back up. A couple of people have approached me over the past couple of years, specifically the past 2 years, of people wanting to learn the sources on head covering. And then recently, a couple months ago, I found it's a TikTok. I don't have TikTok. It was transferred to YouTube, and it was a really sweet young Muslim couple that they do a lot of little skits trying to introduce you to their lives as a modern couple who are also practicing Muslims, and the wife is a hijabi, meaning she's a woman who wears a hijab. And in one of the videos she made was about like Muslim hijabi woman problems, where like the Amazon guy comes to the door and then she has to run and they cover her head to get the Amazon package and do all these things. And I was actually laughing because I think that that's actually something that Orthodox women who cover their hair can sometimes relate to, depending on their custom and what they follow. So I was thinking about how similar, all the similarities we have that I have with women, with hijabi women. So I decided to do a two-part series, one on the sources, as some people had requested to learn together, and one with Nabila Mansoor. So next week is going to be the session with Nabila Mansoor. She's an incredible woman and a local activist who also happens to be Muslim and wears a hijab. And so she agreed to talk with me next week. So that's going to be really fun. So tune in next week, Monday at 8 p.m. Central Time for that conversation. Tonight is going to be just a marathon of sources. Usually, and I was taught back when I was in school, when you teach a class, like you give one sheet of paper, maybe both sides, but that's it. And tonight is much longer than that. I have so many sources, but it's really just because I want people can look at it later on at a different point. It's really just to run through it. It's to give you a basic idea, but there's going to be a lot of information thrown at you. But like, let's get into it. Let's have fun. Why not? Carpe diem. So first, I'm going to share the link if anyone wants to open it on their own computer, and then I'll also share screen. Hold on one second. I'll get that link for you in a second. Okay. All right. Let me know if this link does not work. And also going to bring Zoom over there. Okay, the link works. Thanks, Sarah. So I'm also going to share screen if that works better for you. Okay, everyone can see the Google Doc here? If that works for you? Okay, great. All right, this is just page one, but that's okay. We're gonna get through this. I'm also going to say that you can feel free to raise hand function or press the chat. I am going to be mindful of the time as we go through it, but feel free to chime in if you have a question, have a thought, or want to jot it down for later. Happy to make this more of a conversation, whatever you would like. So first of all, I really want to give a major shout out to a somewhat new website called Diracheha. I'll put it in the chat at the end. Diracheha is a beautiful website led by a number of very learned women, mostly Americans who have made aliyah to Israel, and they put together beautiful presentation of the halacha of women's mitzvot. And they go through in depth and in sources. They have a podcast matching each article. It's really wonderful, and it is one of the best presentations of Kisoi Rosh that I've ever seen. Rabbi Henkin has an article people used a lot. Rabbi Michael Broyd has an article that's very in-depth. There's a lot. Rabbi Aryeh Freemer, I'm pretty sure, has an article as well. I think Derech HaHat did a beautiful job. So I very much copied the way that I organized it with them and their sources. So I wanted to give them a major shout out, and I'm going to share their website afterwards because I think they're wonderful if anyone's ever interested in learning this more or any other mitzvot. Specifically, I think it's just women's mitzvot more. Okay, let's jump into the halachic basis. Kisoi Rosh, covering hair in Orthodox Judaism. It's not a typical, I would say, halachic corpus. Let's compare it to something like keeping kosher, keeping Shabbat, because I'm also going to just add, I'm usually much more conversational, but because there's so much information, it's very frontal, which is not my happy place. I'm much happier doing conversation. It's not a typical halachic corpus in that usually, often, a halacha will start with a pasuk in the Torah. Let's say, lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo, don't cook a goat in its mother's milk. And then the oral Torah will come and explain what that means in kashrut. And then the next sources, the Gemara, and then the Rishonim, the earlier commentaries, and the Middle Ages, and then the Achronim, the later ages, more contemporary, past 500 years, will then fill it in even more. Hair covering is not like that. It's kind of a little bit all over the place. Some things this way, some things that way. It's not very clear. So we're going to try to make it clear for you, but I wanted to give that because you'll see the nature of head covering is not straightforward and it's not linear. It's not like we're starting at point A and just getting to Z. So what is the source? Let's get at the source. First of all, there is no single verse in the Torah that actually commands a married woman. I'm sorry, I'm looking down, these are my notes. That commands a married woman to cover her hair. It is derived from the ordeal of the sota. A sota is when a husband suspects his wife of an illicit relationship with another man. He can file basically an official injunction against her, issuing her a warning not to be alone with this man. If she then proceeds to be alone with this man and there are witnesses to prove it, he can choose to pursue the claim against her. It goes all the way up to the Beit HaMikdash, to the temple, and makes its way to high court. And there she is tried as a sota, as this wanton woman, this adulterous woman. And part of the process for a sota is that they do a number of things to her. And one of them is to kind of degrade her or disgrace her. So here we have this first pasuk in Bamidbar, source 1, V'ha'amid ha'kohen et ha'isha. So the kohen at the Beit HaMikdash, he stands over the woman, lifnei Hashem upara et rosh ha'isha, and he uncovers the head of the woman. So I'm just going to pause there. Part of the process is that he's uncovering her hair. The Gemara, the oral Torah infers from here, it must be the baseline is that married women usually have their hair uncovered, and part of the sota and degrading her is uncovering her hair. So it's not a direct pasuk that says a married woman should cover her hair. It's implied from the sota. It's a given, married women cover their hair. The Talmud in Ketubot, source 2, very much says this is a deoraita, meaning a Torah level mitzvah. Rosha parua deoraita hi. Her hair uncovered is a matter of Torah law. And then it quotes this pasuk that we just mentioned in source 1, upara et rosh ha'isha, v'tana debe el Yishmael. The school of Beit Ishmael says, Azhara lebenot Yisrael shelo yitz'u bifra rosh. So it's a warning to all of the daughters of Israel that they should not go out with their hair uncovered. So we'll unpack that source a couple more times going forward. But basic understanding here is that there is a Torah level law of this is the source for women covering their hair. None of the details more than that. There is a machloket, a halachic debate as to whether the source is deoraita or the obligation is deoraita, a Torah level, or derabanan, rabbinic. The majority of commentaries do say it is deoraita, Torah level, and we have the Piskei Riaz here. He says, okay, I'm gonna keep going. He says it is deoraita. We're gonna come back to the source anyway. The Truman Hadeshan, who is not a lightweight, he is a very serious halachic authority, but he does say he thinks it's derabanan. De priyat rosh ha'isha eino ela zihirut miderabanan. This is just a warning on a dirabanan level, a rabbinic prescription, this translates it as. And the understanding from the Truma Hadeshin as why does the Gemara earlier say that it's a Torah level? Because he says it's an asmachta. An asmachta is a teaching device that the Torah uses to reinforce a rabbinic decree. All right, is everyone with me? I can't see everyone because I'm sharing screen, so I'm gonna scroll for a second. All right, hope everyone's good. If anyone who uses, Sarah, you use Zoom a lot. If people should like raise hand, will I see it? Okay, great. Okay, so we know that, okay, and then we want to now classify. Oh, I see it. You're saying, I see it. Okay, thanks. Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, we're now going to classify what kind of mitzvah is this? What level are we discussing here? Now, this is where we get into dat Moshe v'dat Yehudit. If anyone's ever learned Kisoi Rosh, this might sound familiar. First, let's start with the marriage ketubah. So when a man and woman get married, at their wedding, they have the ketubah, the marriage contract. And in the marriage contract, it says kedat Moshe v'Yisrael. And there are also, which means, well, I can't really translate. I'm going to translate it in a minute. But the literal translation would be kedat Moshe, within the knowledge of Moshe, but kedat Yisrael, within the knowledge of Yisrael. They're halachic categories. Some versions actually say kedat Moshe kedat Yehudi. So we're going to look at these two categories. What is dat Moshe and dat Yehudi? So with a, oh, sorry, someone messaged me about the passcode. Okay, I should keep it right in front of me. Okay. With any contract, there are clauses in the contract that if either person is in breach of the contract, they will exit the agreement without stripped of whatever their rights or standing rights, his or hers, are. So the Mishnah we're about to look at lists the behaviors for which a woman would be forced out of the ketubah contract because she was in breach of certain halachic behaviors. She didn't act in the way that she was supposed to, and therefore she is in breach of her contract. The ketubah no longer applies to her. She's not owed any of the things that the ketubah otherwise would have ensured for her. And the Mishnah discusses two types of halachic categories that she might violate. The first one is dat Moshe, which the Rashba, another Rishon, another early sage, describes as anything of Torah level. So the Mishnah first talks about the Torah level. The second line says, "Ve'ezohi dat Moshe ma'achilat she'eno moshar," that she feeds him something that's not ma'aser, it's tithed, umisham sho nida, that she engages in sex with him during nida, but she didn't tell him. All these other examples, and then the third to last line, "Ve'ezohi dat Yehudit." And what is dat Yehudit? Now the Rashba explains dat Yehudi as things of binding custom. This is not like it's a minhag. It's just a custom that people keep. It's a binding minhag. This is something that the Jews have decided as a community they're going to keep, and it's binding. And the examples that the Mishnah gives, ve'ezo dat Yehudi, yotza verosha parua. She goes out with her hair, her verosha, I'm sorry, I have to be very specific, her head uncovered. And then some other examples as well. So in the Mishnah, we see hair covering is dat Yehudit. It's this binding custom category of halacha. So where, and I'm gonna skip the Mishnah, source 6, because we'll bring it up in the next section. So is it Torah law? Let's just sum up this section. Is it Torah law? Is it binding law? Where does it fall? So if we look back at source 3, I just scrolled down on Zoom and not here. There we go. If we look back at source 3, it says if she didn't have a kalta, which is this minimum head covering we're going to explore on her head, that is prohibited from the Torah, for which it says, and he uncovers the woman's head, and is an admonishment to the daughters of Israel not to go with their head uncovered. So the Gemara in Ketubot is saying there is something, a Torah fundamental halachic basis, that a woman has to cover her hair with something. And then dat Yehudi, these binding Jewish customs came in to explain and to add certain halachic strictures to what women cover, what women do not cover, and what they take on as a binding custom. So just to review this section for a second, 820. Just to review this section, the Torah source is derived from Sota. It's implicit. It's not explicit, but it's implicit and derived from Sota. Most agree it will be a Doraita level. There are those authorities like the Trumat Hadeshen who thinks it's Derabanan. And how a woman might cover her hair and where a woman might cover her hair and all the different details of covering hair is Dat Yehudit, I'm sorry, which is a binding Jewish custom. It's not in the Torah, it's a binding Jewish custom. Okay, we're gonna move on to section 2, which is the why. Why do we have this mitzvah? What is the reasoning? Please feel free to just like raise hand if there's any questions, if I didn't explain something. Okay, the why. So one thing that Derech made a nice point of, which I wanted to point out as well, is that the why that the sages discuss, remember that they're discussing this, 2,000 to 1,000 to 500 years ago. And so society itself has a very different consciousness of how people carried themselves, how people dressed in society. So whereas in modern society, we wouldn't necessarily associate covering hair with, let's say I have these two, the first two reasons, rationales we're going to discuss is dignity and modesty. We wouldn't necessarily say someone's more dignified if they have a hat. I would say in most formal functions, if someone covers their hair, a lot of women choose to wear a wig. They almost never wear a wig these days, mostly because I'm in Houston and it's just always hot. But I would wear a wig if it were to a wedding, which I also haven't been to in a while because of COVID, or a big formal function. I feel like wearing hair would be more formal for myself. It doesn't mean it actually is, it's for me. I should mention the Queen of England always wears a hat to formal occasions, as do all the women to formal events like weddings. So there is some level in society of donning a hat as something as dignified, but it really, in this modern society, it's just very different now. The takeaway from the sources we're about to read, though, hopefully could be showing the level of respect that the Talmudic sages had for women and that they were trying to give to women. Whereas now some might look at a halachic obligation for a married woman to cover her hair as something that is, from the patriarchy and is thrown upon women. And I think the sages were really trying to create a dignified environment for a woman. I also will be getting into that just kind of philosophical aspect next week with Nabila, because I'm sure she gets it even more than me about how people must think that she's, what's the word? You're all muted. What's the word? I can't think of the word. You know what I'm saying?
Oppressed?
Thank you. Oppressed. Daylight savings time. Totally threw me. That she's oppressed. I'm sure they think that because she wears a hijab, and she's going to explain why she doesn't feel that way. Okay, so let's jump into the first reason, dignity. So I'm going to do these sources outside, but more or less, these sources explore how, specifically with source 7, it's the Mishnah in Sota. It's saying the fact that we uncover a woman's hair when she is a sota, when she's an adulterous woman, is that it's a mida keneged mida, a measure for a measure. She adorned herself for this transgression, and therefore God's going to disgrace her. Let's say she was, again, I can't think of the word, but it's okay. She kind of let down her guard with another man when she shouldn't have, and therefore they're going to say, well, then we're going to disgrace you in this way by taking your hair, uncovering your hair. The Sifri also kind of reflects that as well. Source number 8, source number 9 in general just talked about how men sometimes used to cover their hair, but women always did. This was just a given of what women used to do back then. This is a sign of dignity. This is a sign of how a woman held themselves. And if you were, this isn't specifically about a married woman, but if you were a woman in society, you covered your hair. Modesty. First of all, I should also mention modesty can sometimes be a buzzword these days. And it's certainly not something I ever wanted to teach when I did teach in high school or worked in camps, when like, let's talk about sneut or tznius. And I'm like, that is so not appealing to me. At the same time, I do like talking about it, and the fact that I think, every woman can choose how they want to carry themselves and how they want to present themselves. And if a woman decides to cover up more and to dress a certain way, that's her prerogative, and no one can tell them she's being oppressed for that, what she considers modesty. So the idea of modesty and hair covering. So the Rambam, Maimonides, he defines Dat Yehudi, whereas the Rashba talked about a binding custom. He says, what is Dat Yehudi? Ve'ezohi Dat Yehudi, source 10, Hu minhag hatzniut shenahagu b'no Yisrael. This was the modest behavior practiced by the daughters of Israel. That all of the Jewish women used to cover their hair. That's the way that the women held themselves. It's the way that the women practiced. And that's why a woman might be in breach of contract. For her ketubah, she wasn't being modest. She wasn't upholding herself to the same standards that the Jewish people at the time were. And therefore, that both would be a praiseworthy thing. And then if she did not follow that, it would be in breach of her ketubah contract. Rabbanit Orah Mevorach, she is a educator in Israel, numerous institutions, and she's also a doctoral student in Israel, currently in gender and philosophy. And she had a beautiful paragraph. I'm going to read the English about why do I love my head covering? And I think it brings up a couple of really nice ideas. She says, and this is source 11, covering the head every day anew creates a healthy distinction for me between home and outside, between private and public, between mine and everyone's. This is a distinction that in our day has utterly faded. In a culture that constantly tells us, belong to everyone, put it on display, show off your looks, seek approval, and get a like, even at home, that would be a social media approval like for those who are not on social media, take a selfie and distribute it all over. There is a difference between a woman who thinks beauty is improper and therefore obstructs her beauty, and one who loves beauty, but wants to channel a part of it to realms that are exclusively hers. By the way, I would not be able to find this meaning in head covering if I experienced it, God forbid, as something that makes me ugly. A couple of points here. The first one is that she talks about the value of privacy and the private and the public realm in our lives. And now certainly in 2021 with social media, the breakdown of private and public, one could say there's been an incredible breakdown, and you're posting your life, which is not necessarily a bad thing. The other side of that, not related to hair covering, but the other side of that you could say is people are posting a certain image that they want to be portrayed on social media, not necessarily what's going on at home, but it's certainly, iPads, they're new. It's certainly, I think social media can really be both positive and negative, but she's also saying there really is a value to having something in the private and public realm. The other part that she mentions in terms of modesty is a woman celebrating her own beauty. That covering hair is not meant to make a woman look ugly or feel ugly. It's a matter of private and public, what's private for her and her family and her husband, and then what's public for other people to see. And she very specifically says at the end, I wouldn't be able to find this meaning in head covering if I experienced it, God forbid, as something that makes me ugly. It shouldn't make someone feel ugly. So I'm going to add here, some people have asked me, why are women allowed to wear wigs? Sometimes they look even more gorgeous. Sometimes they look like a Barbie with a beautiful hair that's totally not natural. So I asked that. I remember asking that in high school to one of my teachers. And I remember the teacher saying to me, a woman never forgets she's wearing a wig, which at the time gave me pause. I didn't necessarily like it at the time, but I still remember it 20 years later. So for her, for that teacher of mine in high school, she was saying it still reminds a woman that she's married. Now that's not here. That's not this section of modesty. That might be the next one. Number 3, I think the idea of a wig also is, even if a woman objectively might look very attractive in a wig, there is still something that's so private if a woman usually doesn't show her hair to other people besides her family. Even if the wig is more luxurious than her own hair, there's still a private and public aspect here that I think Rabbanit Mevorach hits on. The 2 primary reasons in the sources for Kisoi Rosh are dignity and modesty. There are other things that have happened throughout history, which we can mention. So over time, women have found head covering is meaningful to them because it shows a marital status. This source number 12 is discussing the halachot of a non-Jewish maidservant. We'll just do it outside. And the non-Jewish maidservant is talking about when she goes out into the shuk, when she goes out into the marketplace, and when she does cover her hair and when she doesn't cover her hair. And so the different laws of a maidservant, specifically this non-Jewish maidservant, implies that as long as she's in a relationship, this woman was careful to cover her hair in public. That she was in this married sphere, so therefore she was able to, she was asked to cover her hair in public. And Rabbanit Henkin, who is the head of Nishmat in Israel, she has a beautiful paragraph about how kind of when a man and woman marry, the barriers of modesty fall between them. And I kind of wrote it down here. Where is it? They stand on the same side of barrier of modesty that separates them and other people, and that halacha sanctifies the physical barrier between, and the special barrier between the couple on one side and everyone else on the other. So again, being married is not the rationale for covering hair, but some people have found that that's more meaningful for them. Number 4 and 5. The awe of Hashem, which I put in parentheses here, is like a kippah, like a yarmulke for men. So the obligation to cover one's head when saying God's name is an obligation for men and is debated in the sources for women. Rabbi Vaja, who is the Sephardi posek, says women do have to cover their hair for, let's say, a bracha or for the mikvah. So Sephardi women do cover their hair for B'Shem Hashem when they say God's name. Ashkenazi women mostly don't follow that minhag. But there is some concept of having the awe of God, which is why we have the kippah as well. We have the Gemara in Kedushin that just talks about the divine presence is above my head. Vigilei Harosh Amar Shechina Lamala Meroshi. The Shechina is above my head. And then the Shulchan Aruch discusses that perhaps Yesh Omrim She'asur Lahotzi Azkara Mipiv Berosh Megula, that there are those who say you shouldn't mention God's name with a not covered head. That they shouldn't go into a shul bareheaded. So some would say this is where some women who don't usually cover, some married women who don't usually cover their hair might cover it in shul. That they will wear a hat for it because it is a makom kadosh and you're going to be reading Torah and davening in that space. The last one I'm going to mention is identification. That having someone's head covers affiliates that woman as an observant Jew. This is somewhat ironic because we talked about the reason for head covering is that it was universal. This is what everyone did and someone dignified did. But history is history and halakha is going to reflect that. And so then some people feel like it is a sign of who they are by showing that they're covering their hair. I think it's this source. Okay, so I'm going to just read the source again outside. This is again Rabbanit Oraya Mevorach, and I loved what she said again about this. I'm aware that this is source 15. I'm aware that my full head covering labels me as a frum woman, even though my attitudes might surprise people who have stereotypes about religious people. I'm very much related to that statement. I'm happy for people to see me, first of all, as a frum woman, and only afterwards to get to know me deeply and be as surprised as they wish, declaring that the internal is what is essential, down with stereotypes, is only meaningful in one direction. It is cogent when said by someone who takes on external signifiers that society stereotypes. And it's not cogent when said by someone who removes external signifiers in order to evade stereotyping. So I kind of just loved what she said, both because I do feel the ambivalence of presenting myself. I feel that more with different ways that I might cover my hair. Totally personal thing. Anyone's free to ask me about that at the end. But I just kind of love that idea that it's both something of pride and something to be mindful of, kind of like a man walking down the street with a kippah. People are going to notice and people are going to make whatever assumptions they may make, good or bad. Okay, 3, we're going to do this one somewhat quickly. I'm going to do it outside, is who covers their hair. So the Rambam Maimonides was the famous proponent of saying all young women should cover their hair from the time they are bat mitzvah, from the time they're 12 and 1 day. They should be covering their hair whether they're married or not. He was also coming from a Muslim society, and that's what women did back then in his area. From the sources, we talk about the fact that it was a sota. It's specifically a woman who was married, whose hair is then uncovered, and the Gemara in Ketubot then backs that up again, that the source is sota. If they keep emphasizing the source is sota, it's specifically linked to a married woman. There is also Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Rabbi Moshe wrote several responsa in discussing about women who were previously married, whether their marriages ended in divorce or whether they are widows. He discusses how it is a lower level of dat Yehudi for previously married women to cover their hair. It's an inference from sota, but it's not explicitly said. And therefore, there are very strong reasons for a woman who feels like if she's no longer married, she doesn't cover her hair. Why would someone cover their hair if they are no longer married? Why doesn't it just kind of automatically stop once their marriage has ended for whatever reason? So one idea would be that her dignity and her identity have become associated with someone who was married. And marital status is also not the reason for covering. But the end of a marriage also emotionally, I think, can go both ways for a woman. Some women might feel like that was the end of the marriage and they want to move on. They want to date, or they want to not worry about this professionally, which Ramosha talked about. You can look at it more in details on your own time. And therefore, they're allowed to take it off. The other one is some women might want to still hold on to that identity of who they were and married to that person, and therefore they might choose to keep it on. It's a lower level of dat Yehudit, and therefore Reb Moshe discusses sources on why he has allowed certain women who were divorced or certain women who were widows to uncover their hair. Okay. Kisoi Rosh, how much? It is 8:36. I'm going to finish within the hour. So it seems like a lot, but we're going to get there. There's 2 more sections. Kisoi Rosh of how much, section 4, and then section 5 is going to be where. This one's the big one. Okay. And again, please stop me. I just haven't looked at my private messages also. Okay. I'll go back to any of those questions later. Okay. The rationales that we discussed of dignity and modesty, while they're very related, each have a different emphasis that can lead to practical differences in how or why a woman might cover her hair. So if a woman is covering her hair for dignity purposes, then it's proper dress that her head is covered. That's not going to specify if there's hair showing or how much hair is showing. It's just going to be that it's covered. She has a hat. Think of the Queen of England, or of a little fascinator that a lot of women in London are wearing. It can be a variety of ways that you cover your hair. If it's a modesty thing, then it's not necessarily about the head. It's more about the hair. How much is she showing, or what is she showing, or where is she showing it? It's a different direction, depending on where you put the emphasis of the rationale. So source number 21, we've seen this 3 times already, but I'm going to just bring it back because this is where, and I think that is a typo, a kalata. It's a kalta. I'll fix that. This is the source. Deoraita kalta shapir dami da Yehudit afilu kalta nami asur. On a Torah level, the Gemara says a kalta, which Rashi, they wrote here, Rashi, a basket, which we'll discuss in a second, suffices. Da Yehudit, again, that additional halachic stricture, is even covering a kalta is not enough, and that's asur. So Reb Moshe Feinstein explains on a Torah level, it says parua rosh, not hair, not se'ar, but it's rosh, her head. So on a Torah level, it's just her head that needs to be covered. And if the root is about sota, then just pulling out some of her hair would be disgraceful enough. It didn't say the Kohen pulls out her hair. It says he uncovers her hair. So her head must have been covered. That's the Torah level. Her head must have been covered. We don't know about the hair. It's kind of, Reb Moshe leaves it as very vague. So here, let's get to why is a kalta, this kind of basket thing, not enough? So we have source number 22 from the Meiri. The Meiri was a halachicist in the 13th century, 13th, 14th century in France. He was a Talmudist and a Maimonidean. And he asked, so why did Da Yehudi take it further than a kalta? And his source is more about dignity. That the kalta was like a nightcap, and it was what you would wear to go to sleep. So you don't go out with your nightcap on. That's not dignified enough. So it's kind of the same thing of your pajamas. Which I do think, again, in our culture, it's different, especially with athleisure being very vogue. But he would say you go out in when you're going to certain places, you're not going to dress a certain way. You don't go in your pajamas, so you don't wear your nightcap out. That's why it's not enough. On a Torah level, it's fine, but it's not enough for Dat Yehudit. That's not what the Jewish custom was. Source number 2, Rashi says, no, kalta is not a nightcap. Kalta was this kind of basket that they would wear on their heads. And it was this woven basket, so it had holes in it. And it wasn't sufficient because hair would fall out or would be seen through the lattice work of the basket. So here we see, I'll just do the English, source 23, a basket that has an indentation on its underside to fit on one's head. They would, I think it was a basket where they would wear like the produce in their head. So do you know what I'm talking about? You're giving me funny looks here. If you look at any, there's actually a recent picture that went viral. It's this beautiful woman in Africa carrying this incredible stack of loaves on her head, and it's because she has this contraption on her head. So it's possible that's what a kalta was. It was a kind of basket where they could carry things through the market on their heads. So Rashi says the kalta is this kind of basket. In source 24, he explains, even a kalta is not sufficient because of modesty, for it's impossible that her hair was not going to be seen between the strips of the basket. It's not sufficient coverage, which means it's more of a modest thing. We have to cover the hair. It's not just about having something on the head. So that's why maybe more than a kalta is what is necessary. So now we're going to go through partial hair covering, why people cover in different ways. Okay, so I skipped a big conversation before when we talked about the reasons why women cover hair, and that buzzword is erva. If anyone has heard of that, erva is the Talmudic or halachic maybe term for nakedness. So I'm going to give a little background on erva, and I'll explain why I didn't bring it in the primary sources. On a deoraita, Torah level, the Torah prohibits men and women from saying God's name in the presence of fully exposed male or female genitalia, which in the Talmud is called erva, nakedness. Now, the rabbinic law extends the isser of erva to other parts of the body as well. So not just genitalia, but there are other parts of the body. So when a man is saying Shema, the Gemara says, and this is a pretty famous quote, tefach be'isha erva. The measurement of a tefach, a hand breadth, which is something like this, of a woman's body that is typically covered, is even for his wife, is considered erva, and he's not supposed to say Shema or say, let's say, the Amidah in the presence of that thing, of that nakedness. And Rav Sheshet, one of the Talmudic sages, explains Se'ar be'isha erva. The hair of a woman is erva. So perhaps hair is a typically covered body part, and the Mishnah points out it's a violation of Dat Yehudi. I also am going to point out this is on the man to look away. This is not on the woman. A woman can do what she wants. The man, if he feels like he's seeing erva, he needs to look away. Why did I not bring this in, or where does it fit in with Kisoi Rosh? So the association of hair with erva is related to halacha and can provide an additional reason for head covering. But Reb Moshe Feinstein very famously discusses how married women's hair is no longer considered erva. It used to be something that was so private and so maybe illustrious that it would be very distracting for a man to say Hashem's name, and therefore he shouldn't see it. But nowadays, when it's very normal for people to not have their hair covered, and general society, not just in Jewish communities, it's not considered erva. It's a different category. So that's why I didn't actually bring it up in the main sources. Rav Moshe doesn't set very explicitly in one of Igro Moshe and one of his responsa says now today married women's hair is not erva. So it's not a reason for Kisoi Rosh, but specifically regarding Kriyat Shema and words of Torah. Now let's get back into partial hair covering. However, the Rashba, one of our Rishonim, one of the earlier medieval sages, discusses how certain areas are a concern for saying the Shema. Paneha ve'yadeha ve'raglaha, her face, hands, and feet. V'se'ara mechutz litzimta. The hair that's outside of whatever she has bound her hair up in, she'enu mitkaseh, what's not covered up, ein chosheshin lahem. We're not going to be choshesh for that. We're not going to be suspicious for that. Clearly, the Rashba is saying a woman covers her hair, and whatever she usually does not cover is not an issue for a man saying Shema. It's not an issue of erva. So with the Rashba, we have a very early rabbinic authority allowing women to let hair emerge, and it's not considered immodest, and it's not considered erva. It seems to be totally fine. He doesn't explain how much, but there certainly was an extent of women not having hair, not having every single hair covered. And the Ramah, the Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, the Ashkenazi posek who comments on the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Law, who kind of clarifies the Ashkenazi law, he brought this lehalacha. He says this is how we paskin. The permissibility of reciting Shema applies when a man can see a woman's hair that is typically emerging from the hair binding. Sheregilin, let's say michutz letzimtan. That usually comes out of the binding of her hair, really implying women can freely leave out hair. We're not sure how much. There's no concern of immodesty or erva. There's this concept of women covering their hair, not that much. Then we have the Mahavram al-Shakar, which is also another famous source in the world of Kisoi Rosh, of covering hair, that it's not even, he kind of brings this opinion that it's not even necessary or even desirable to cover every strand of hair. And there's a long-standing custom confirming with the standards of modesty in the surrounding society. So if surrounding society normally wears their hair out in a braid, you could wear your hair out in a braid. So this is not the opinion of everyone. This is a Maharam al-Shakar, but there's certainly people who do follow that. Now let's get to tefach. So this is where erva comes back in even more. So we discussed it just a minute ago how Reb Moshe thought it was the head and not the hair that was the d'oraita level. What's odd is that when he talks about how much hair is going to be what he thinks is permissible to be shown, even though he said he does not think hair covering is because of married women's hair being erva, this nakedness, this hand breadth measurement, he turns to that measurement when he discusses how much a woman can show. I'm going to read it in English for the time. Since the law of the typically covered areas, there's distinction between a tefach and less, meaning when we discuss showing things and not showing things, the Talmud follows tefach be'isha erva, this hand breadth. Therefore, one should not prohibit if she wants to reveal hair, but only 2 etzba'ot, finger width. So they say this measurement of a tefach can also be measured out as 2 finger widths, and the length of that is the same. And so he would say it's either the front or the back, and some might argue somewhere in the middle. But he definitely says this certain amount, this hand breadth is allowed, and you're not in violation of the obligation of covering your hair if you show this hand breadth, this specific tefach of hair. The other side of more than not just the tefach, more than just this area, would be Reb Nachum Rabinovich, who is a very prominent Israeli halachic posek in the kind of modern Dati Leumi world in Israel. And he points out chiefly she must cover her head. It's specifically her rosh, not her hair. Erva is not the source of prohibition, even as Reb Moshe said. So there's no reason to apply this tefach measurement to hair covering. More than a tefach is fine as long as it's not the majority of the head. She should have most of her hair covered. It shouldn't be the majority of her head. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein from the Gush Etzion Yeshiva agreed with this as well, and he rejected the tefach measurement. It's possible that some women who do let hair flow outside of a hat or a scarf or something like that would attribute their reasoning to Rabbi Rabinovich, source 29, whereas Rabbi Lichtenstein did come out and say he agrees with that response, but he doesn't think hair should be flowing out and be left uncovered in that degree. I am going to mention, as much as I somewhat cringe with these sources, I am going to talk about full hair for a minute because it is really interesting. Why would someone completely cover every single hair on their head? So there is this puzzling Gemara that often is brought up with Kisoi Rosh about this woman named Kimchit, that the rabbis turned to her and said, you had 7 sons who served as the Kohen Gadol, the head priest. How did you deserve such a thing? And her response was, in all my days, the beams of my house never saw the braids of my hair. That she didn't uncover her hair, even in her own home. And they said to her, many have done so and did not achieve an effect. So they're kind of acknowledging, like, that's an interesting method. It didn't seem to work for other people, but it seems to have worked for her. So a couple of things about this. The passage is implying that Kimchit's act was unusual and not expected. This was something lifnim mishur hadin. This was beyond what we women normally did back then. Clearly not all women shared this practice. And it suggested that women could meet standards of modesty without covering every single hair of their head, especially in their own home. I don't remember who pointed this out, but someone pointed out to me years ago, in order for someone to become a Kohen Gadol, the first other Kohen Gadol has to die and someone has to take it in their place. So if she had 7 sons who was a Kohen Gadol, that means those 7, or at least 6 sons died. So someone once pointed out, I think it might have been Rabbi Moshe Khan from GPATS, I'm not positive, I think it was him. He pointed out this is a kind of vague and puzzling Gemara to base things on, because it's very possible she was admonished and punished for taking it a little too far, or maybe it wasn't connected at all. I don't know. However, the Zohar does bring up this idea. The Zohar is a mystical work. It is very much relied upon by the rationales for halachic basis. And it says it's not necessary, but it is considered a praiseworthy thing to cover every single hair on the head. This is especially followed in Hasidic circles. And this is also where the Chassam Sofer discusses how a woman should wear 2 hair coverings to make sure to follow the Zohar. So that is often why if you see a Hasidic woman wearing a wig and then usually like a little cap or I don't remember what they're called, a pill something cap. Someone mentioned it. Whoever can remind me what's called. Those little hats. So Hasidic women wear 2 because the Chassam Sofer was saying we need to follow the Zohar. We need to be extra machmir. Let's make sure we have 2 hair coverings on people's heads, and many Hasidic communities actually do that. Okay, last section, and we got 8 minutes left. Whew. Hold on one second. Pillbox. Thank you, Rose. Okay. Hi, Ellie. Okay, so someone messaged me. So someone mentioned, can't the Kohen Gadol become puzzle for other reasons, like becoming disabled or unmarried? Yes, that is true. The most common known source would be that they passed away, and that was, and that's what someone had pointed out to me. I would also say, though, if they're becoming disabled or any of these other more negative reasons, then it would still not be great that they were leaving their status as a Kohen Gadol. But it's a good point. What just happened? Last section. Kisoi Rosh where? Let me just find my notes. Okay. Kisoi Rosh where? This is going to be much more simple. The standards of what is considered dignified or what is modest changes depending on where a person is. If a person is dressed differently in their own bathroom, in their own bedroom, versus when they're food shopping versus a formal function. So It also, Kisoi Rosh, covering one's head, might depend on where they are and where they're located. So there are very significant sources for a woman not covering her hair in her own home, in her own private domain. The Gemara that we have seen 4 times already now in source 32 talks about the women, the daughters of Israel, Asara B'no Yisrael Shelo Yitz'u B'Parua Rosh. They shouldn't go out with their head uncovered. I mean, they shouldn't go out. They shouldn't go out to the public with their head uncovered. Emphasis on going out, clearly. And then the Gemara specifically discusses the hair being covered in an open marketplace versus a private courtyard, and where she can and can't wear it. And it's, I mean, I can't get into the specifics here. There's a lot more sources we can learn about this. The private courtyards, the way that the homes used to work is that it was a bundle of homes and a private courtyard in between. And sometimes the private courtyard could go out to a street, sometimes it didn't. So I'm not going into that. But there was a whole conversation about the fact that perhaps she would dress differently in a courtyard in the homes around her versus her own home versus the marketplace. It depends where she was. The second part, though, which is somewhat hilarious for in Tosfot points out in source 33, is he points out it clearly must be that a woman didn't have to cover her hair in the privacy of her own home or in her private courtyard. In the last line, it says, "For if that's not the case, you have not left the daughter of Avram Avinu," meaning every single woman would have been in breach of their contract, of their ketubah contract, if this were the case. It must be that women must have been able to uncover their hair in private domains. And I'm going to get to who and when you can uncover your hair for the person who sent me a question about when you can do that. The Shulchan Aruch, when he codifies this as a halacha, he says very specifically, Lo talachna b'no Yisrael pruat rosh bashuk. They shouldn't go out into the shuk, into the marketplace, into the public area. I'm just running through these as we have a few minutes left, and then anyone is welcome to leave. If anyone wants to stay on for questions, you can stay on for a bit. So we see here that the halacha was transmitted through this interplay of text and lived tradition, right? That the Shulchan Aruch seems to be holding like the Tosfot. We have here source 35. These are the things that if she did one of them, she has transgressed Yehudit. She goes out to the marketplace or to an open alley or to the courtyard through which public possesses and her head is uncovered. So there's going to be different levels of what she can wear and whatnot. The Trumat Hadeshen, so it kind of just infers privately. Until now, we infer privately, it's fine, because we're just talking about going out. Trumat Hadeshen, who was the source in the beginning that talked that this is just a rabbinic level, says very clearly, not in the privacy of your own home. Where a lot of people are not normally found, as in your own courtyard, there is no objection. It's totally fine. What if other people are there? It depends on what you're comfortable with. We have source 37 and source 38. Source 37, getting tongue-tied. Source 37, Rav Ovadia Yosef. He says, Rav Yosef Cairo, he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. She is permitted to go bareheaded within her own home. And our master, Rav Ovadia, answered, Rav Yosef Cairo wrote that it's permitted, and that's it. He just wrote, what about other people there? He just wrote it's permitted. So the degree of whether you can uncover your hair with other people there is a machloket. It's debatable. Where Moshe says, for those women who are not stringent to act like kimchi, but rather in accordance with her obligation that in her home, when there are no other people there, non-household members, she does not cover her hair. And when they go in the marketplace or in front of other people, they need to go in those situations with greater modesty. I got a couple of questions here specifically about this. So about whether other people are in your home. So certainly people would allow for other women to be in your own home. A woman would be able to uncover her hair completely. Some women take it upon themselves that only their family or their husband is only going to uncover their hair. That's a personal choice. If other men are in your home, there are significant sources that would say if it's not like a huge party, it's still your private space and there's only, and it's a small party of people, and it's not even a party. There's one other man there, some would still uncover their home. It's their private space. It's not about marriage. A lot of women don't do that more because they might be uncomfortable, they're not used to it, or they don't want to make other people uncomfortable with all of a sudden seeing their hair. But there is halachic basis for a woman to just uncover her hair in her own home. When if not throwing a big party, it's still seemingly fine. Moshe suggests it's better for a woman to cover her hair in her home if other people are there. There's really kind of a range of opinions, and I guess what you're comfortable with, or your rabbinic, or I guess what I would say halachic authority, given that people go to men and women for these halachic questions. I'm going to end before I open it up to any kind of questions or thoughts. I loved something that I once heard years ago from Shani Tarragon, Rabbi Shani Tarragon, who's also American, who made Aliyah to Israel. And she once said, any way a woman kind of covers her hair if she's married, there's a source for it. So that's not to undermine any of the sources. But as I said in the very beginning, it's not a straightforward halachic sugya. Not that Shabbat and Kashrut are always straightforward, they're complicated, but it's very much an interplay, as I said before, of halacha and tradition and what's customary 2,000 years ago, what is binding. So it is, so there is significant basis for pretty much any way a woman might cover her hair. And I think it's also for a woman, different women might relate very differently to it. Some women might find it very meaningful and something that they love, and some women might hate it and resent it. And it's really important that each woman fulfills the mitzvah in whatever way makes them love Judaism more. There's a lot of different ways women can cover their hair, and I think it's really important to have, I can stop share of my sources. And I think it's really important to have those conversations and to think about those conversations. Okay, so I'm going to, actually, I think anyone can unmute themselves. I do have a question here that was sent to me privately. Hold on, I'm just gonna read it 1 second. So someone brought up the word parua. I'm glad you brought this up. Someone said, is it true it doesn't necessarily mean covering? I've heard it could mean just that her hair was wild, so maybe the Sota's hair was just braided. So that was actually a great point, and it comes exactly what I was just saying. That's what Shani Tarragon had actually mentioned. Some might consider parua, when she says the Sota let her hair be parua, it means that it was braided and that he unbraided her hair. So if a woman decides to cover her hair by braiding her hair, then that's a level. So it can be, again, it's not a straightforward halachic. So yeah, open to a lot of interpretation. There certainly seems to be a halachic discussion and a basis and a Torah level obligation, but it's definitely something of debate. Any other thoughts or comments? And feel free to, hold on, I'm gonna just open the chat here. So next week, I'm very, very excited. Next Monday at 8 p.m., I'm going to be having a conversation with Nabila Mansoor. She is a woman who is Muslim and wears a hijab. So we're going to be talking about the similarities and differences of what it means to be a modern woman in society who cover our hair for religious reasons. She's also just an incredibly impressive and wonderful woman in general. So I'm really excited to connect with her and talk to her with all of you. So feel free to come back next week. And thank you everyone for coming today. And also if anyone wants me to, and one last thing. I want to send you the derachaha. It's derachaha.org. Really wonderful website to explore mitzvot. This recording will be available, hopefully uploaded on the UOS YouTube. I will be posting that on Facebook. I'm gonna stop recording.